have your small P, but it is not necessarily aligning, but not in a bad way. What advice you have to for them to think about as they progress through their career? And second is, from the Gen Z's perspective, what can they do? Because I think a lot of our conversation, you're right that what a good employer and a manager should do, but I'm flipping it to say that, even that generation has been tagged, and you always want to be cautious, but to say that, they're fragile. Sort of like what people were saying about Gen Y. They're narcissistic and they're more entitled. So, is there some onus on them as well? So, I gotta ask two questions. One is if there isn't an alignment between the small p and the org p, and how do you tackle maybe the pressure that comes in a process like that? And then second is what can the Gen Z do?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. I mean, I think, so let me give you an example of the non-alignment. So I was new to the work of organizational learning and development, and I was running a session called Leading Learning Organizations at Coca-Cola back in the late 90s. And we had a group of leaders come in that wanted to learn the tools of organizational learning that from Peter Senge's work in around 1990. Um, And which, by the way, is still highly relevant in
Very
my
good.
opinion. It's really a classic, and I think I owe my career to it, and I'm still working with those concepts and tools in various ways, with leaders today. But the interesting thing that happened is we were having a conversation about, people have read Fifth Discipline, they'll know this concept, the idea of personal mastery, which is kind of this process of understanding my purpose and what I'm really good at and what I'm here for, right? And how do I kind of refine that view? It's sort of a journey. Um, we went through that, and there was a break, and then one of our colleagues who, this is all internal, so we're internal trainers teaching people sort of that we know, and this one woman came up to us and said, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I get it." And the two facilitators, me and a colleague of mine, we said, "What?" She said, "I don't belong here. I need to leave." So that was sort of a dramatic example of it happening. Now, I worried at the time that that was sort of a reaction to a partial thing about what we've been talking about. Like, the company's values don't really align with mine. I think it might have been that. I was not exactly into I didn't grow up, a big, huge fan of soda pop, right? But I really was admired this company, and I found a niche in that company that I really loved. I loved that work that I was doing. So I my first advice is make sure you're really, framing your contribution and understanding your contribution. And my first recommendation to anyone who's going through a little bit of a crisis of purpose is if you're on a team, which you probably are at this stage, have a conversation with each of your team members, peers, and your boss, and say, "Can you give me feedback on what contributions I'm making that you particularly value?"
Yeah.
Now, I'm borrowing a little bit here from Adam Grant's work, Adam Grant at Wharton. He did some really interesting research on internal teams talking to each other about what their contributions were, and engagement goes way up, right? So, first and foremost, you need to understand how people inside your company value your contribution. That's more relevant, the research shows, than this abstract sense of what the company's purpose is, because my supposition is the company's purpose is probably not all that clear yet anyway.
Hmm.
So it's important not to infer too much into that for most companies. Now, we've got lots of outlying examples on both ends of the spectrum of companies that I think are incredibly purposeful and make it part of their DNA every day. And companies that, that are just wandering around trying to build cash, right? So or money. So it's sort of like try to understand what others think of your contribution so that you kind of get feedback. And that's, I think, your first anchor. The second thing to do is actually, I'm asking them to step back from what their preconceived notions of what the company's purpose is, and sort of look more locally at first. The second, the second thing I would do is I would say there does come a point where you're going to have to decide what kinds of companies you're willing to work with and ones you're not. And I found personally by asking myself that question, it had less to do with the business model of the company personally, and it had much more to do with the culture. That's just how I'm wired, right? So if I'm working, I mean, I don't, and I'll tell you, I've got a client that does stuff that I would never assume I have any relationship with, and they're my favorite client. They're a large engineering firm. I am not an engineer. I did not take one engineering course in either college or grad school. It was all social sciences and business, right? And uh, I absolutely love this company, and if they and, I even said to them, when I was leaving Duke C, I said, "Look, if you guys want me to come join you, if you have anything you think I can add value to, let me know." And the CEO got on the phone and said, "Michael, we love you, blah, blah." But it was just this realization that here I am surprisingly aligning with a company that I would just never would have known I would have had anything to do with. So I would say when you look at the company and what they do in their business model and their strategy, ask yourself, is that really the most important thing to you? Is it perhaps more important how they treat their people, what their culture is like, how they develop, how they lead? Those things I found were much more important to me. So again, my ask is look locally first. Now, after you've done that work, you might find, I'm working for a company that, it's just a red line for me. I can't be working in this company that does these things. For example, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people who are ex-tobacco employees, and they're just like, I can't do it, right? So these are sort of more extreme examples. And then, I've had similar, I'll give you another example of people who are working in a defense company. They make jets and they make jet parts and, weaponry, right? And there are other people who are like, I am so into this company because they're defending our country. And then other people are like, I can't be in the killing business, right? So you've got to at some point recognize, is there a values conflict that's at the root of this?
Good point.
I think it kind of goes in that order. But my encouragement to everyone is look locally first, look more locally first than kind of this abstract view. And, I found a lot of things I loved. I absolutely, I think I always talk very, very fondly of my time at the LA Times. First of all, I love newspapers, right? So that they had me at hello when I joined them. Secondly, I love the people I worked with. Loved them. They were great. They were all ex-consultants and they were all really kind of tired of the consulting world and they wanted to get into something where we were actually doing something every day that, the paper goes out every day. There's a tremendous amount of great stuff that went on in that job for me, and I felt I was totally aligned. But I would say that whilst the newspaper as a concept was like a really cool thing to be associated with, which is nice, it was the team that really made it for me, right? So ask yourself, is this the right team as well? And I also have talked to lots of clients who were in good companies, bad teams, they moved teams, they're really super happy and super interested. And I, by the way, just want to preface all this by saying, I think purpose is a wonderful vehicle to uncover and to ensure that you be happy in the work that you're in, right? The kind of by definition, but not just happy, energized. Because you don't want to be in a job where we all know the feeling, right? You're commuting. It's a rainy afternoon, morning, or whatever it is. It's a rainy morning. You're kind of commuting and you're just kind of taking a deep breath and you're thinking, I got to get back to this job. And you just like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And when you ask, why the heck are you doing this? You probably have a crisis of purpose. And I got to start asking these questions. And in fact, my co-author Sudhanshu writes about it in the book. He talks about, I think it was a particularly bad day. He had a bad day and he's driving on the M25 in London and it's raining and he's stuck in traffic and it's 7:30 at night and he's hungry. And he just said, what am I doing this for? Now, I've been in traffic not on the M25, but here in Los Angeles in the rain, terrible traffic and awful. And I'm going, I love my job. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting. Those things can trigger you. Those things can really trigger you. There are days when I was consulting and I was flying every week and I thought this travel is killing me. I've got to stop this because I just feel awful all the time. I'm traveling too much. Then what did I do, Nikhil? I went to work for Duke C and traveled more. And it didn't bother me.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm having a great time because I love this work and I'm like, the travel's fine.
Yeah.
So it's easy, especially when you're not real clear on these deep fundamental questions, which is part of the human experience, not being clear on this stuff. Um, it's easy to pick out certain aspects of the job and say, that's not for me, that's not for me, that's not for me. And so I think it's helpful to really step back and ask these more fundamental questions. What's really what really do I value and what really does alignment look like for me, and start local and work your way out. Don't get too overly, conceptual about it. Get really relevant.